Imagine a world where a beautiful orphan is forced to marry a poor woodcutter because she is seen as a curse. But what if that poor man unknowingly holds a secret that could change everything? Discover the tale of Zuri, a story of pain, surprise, and a twist that turns the tables on those who wronged her. In a faraway land, there was a prosperous town full of colorful markets, busy streets, and happy people. This town was ruled by a wicked king who cared more about power than kindness. Even though the town looked bright and lively, everyone knew that the king's heart was as cold as ice. He made many harsh rules, and his subjects lived in fear. Yet, the people still worked hard and tried to be happy despite the king's cruelty. In the same town, there lived a gentle and beautiful girl named Zuri. When Zuri was very little, her parents loved her more than anything in the world. They hugged her every day, sang sweet songs, and filled her life with warmth and laughter. Zuri used to laugh and play with them in the garden, where the sun always shone brightly and the flowers danced in the gentle breeze. She felt safe and cherished in their loving arms. But one terrible day everything changed. Zuri's kind parents died suddenly. The townspeople later whispered that their demise was caused by Chief Issa's ruthlessness, for her parents had owed him money. The loss of her parents left Zuri feeling empty and alone. Her heart ached for the warm hugs and gentle voices she once knew. Every night, as she looked at the stars, she wished with all her might that her parents could come back and hold her close again. After her parents died, Chief Issa, a wealthy businessman, took Zuri in. He said he would care for her and give her a home. His large house was filled with pretty gardens and fine furniture, and he wanted everyone in the town to believe that he was kind and generous. But deep inside, Chief Issa and his family were not kind at all. They were proud, mean, and arrogant. They did not love Zuri like her parents had. Instead, they blamed her for her parents' death. They even said that Zuri was a curse and the reason her parents died. Inside the big house, life was not gentle at all for Zuri. Every day she was made to work very hard. She had to water the plants, clean every room, and set the table for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. While she did all these chores, the family looked at her with cold eyes and harsh words. They whispered mean things behind closed doors. Zuri was always tired and her hands were sore from all the work. No matter how much she tried, she could never earn a kind word or a smile from the family. The adoptive family's own daughter, Nia, was very different from Zuri. Nia was spoiled and proud. She wore fancy clothes and loved to show off. Every time Nia saw Zuri, she would make fun of her. "You are too plain and ugly," Nia would say with a sneer on her face. Nia would laugh loudly and push Zuri aside so that everyone could see how much better she thought she was. When Nia laughed, it hurt Zuri's feelings deeply, and she felt unwanted and small. Nia's hurtful words made Zuri cry quietly in her room at night, wishing she could be loved and cared for like she used to be by her own parents. Even when Zuri tried to smile and be kind, the family's bitterness made her feel like she did not belong. The adoptive parents always praised Nia and made her the center of attention. They compared Zuri to Nia, saying that Zuri's beauty only made Nia look more ordinary. They treated Zuri like she was a bad luck charm that brought trouble. Every harsh word, every rough touch, and every angry look made Zuri's heart feel heavier. She missed her parents' soft voices and warm embraces, and she longed for the love that once filled her life. Zuri's days were filled with hard work, but her nights were just as cruel. She was not given a soft bed like Nia's, with fluffy pillows and warm blankets. Instead, she slept on a thin mat on the cold, hard floor in a small, dark corner of the house. The room was barely big enough for her to stretch her legs, and the chilly wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, making her shiver at night. Sometimes rats would scurry past her, their tiny claws scratching the floor, and she would curl up in fear, hugging herself tightly. Sleep never came easily. Her stomach often growled from hunger, for she was never allowed to eat a full meal. While Nia feasted on rich foods, sweet fruits, and warm bread, Zuri was given only scraps, stale bread, watery soup, or half-eaten leftovers. Many nights, she lay awake, clutching her empty stomach, tears rolling down her cheeks as she remembered the warm meals her mother used to make. The hunger made her weak, the cold made her ache, and the loneliness made her heart heavier. No matter how much she tried to be strong, each night felt like a battle she was losing. Even though Zuri was treated badly by Chief Issa's family, the kind heart inside her continued to shine. People in the town noticed that despite everything, her eyes sparkled with hope and kindness. They would say, "Zuri is a gentle soul. She lights up the room with her smile," even though her smile was often hidden by sadness. Deep down, Zuri hoped that one day someone would see her true worth, and that she would finally be loved for who she was. In that once prosperous town, filled with bright markets and busy streets, Zuri's life was a constant battle against pain and loneliness. Yet, every day, even with her tears and sorrow, she kept a tiny spark of hope alive, dreaming that one day love and kindness would return to her life, just as it once had when her parents held her close. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Chief Issa and his wife made arrangements for Nia to marry the prince. This news made Nia so happy and excited that she could hardly wait to become queen. In her excitement, she grew even more arrogant toward Zuri, often telling her to her face that she was too ugly and miserly to ever attract any worthy man. She wore the finest dresses and boasted about her beauty. Her parents believed that Nia was destined for greatness. They thought that by marrying someone from the royal family, Nia would become even more important. The family talked about this plan in whispers and secret meetings, far away from the eyes of everyone in the house. "Imagine it," her father said with a proud smile. "Our Nia, a princess married to the son of the king. That would make our family the most important in the town." Her mother nodded eagerly. "Yes, our daughter will shine like the brightest star, and everyone will respect us." They spoke with great arrogance, as if they were already the rulers of the town. Every word they said made it clear that they thought nothing was better than being rich and powerful. In their eyes, only the finest things in life mattered, and they believed that they deserved all the honor and wealth that came with a royal connection. But as they planned this grand future for Nia, they spoke of Zuri in a different, darker tone. "Look at her," her father would say whenever Zuri passed by. "So lovely, yet she is not one of us. She is just an orphan, a mistake we took in." Her mother would agree, her voice cold and harsh. "She only brings trouble. We must make sure everyone knows that Nia is the true jewel of this family, not that other girl." Meanwhile, poor Zuri continued her quiet life. She helped with small chores, watered the garden, and smiled gently at everyone. Zuri never said anything about the unkind words that were whispered about her behind closed doors. Instead, she held on to hope in her heart, believing that one day things might be different. Even when the family celebrated and talked about the upcoming royal marriage, their eyes were never kind when they looked at Zuri. They would point and giggle, making mean comments that made her feel even smaller. To them, every beautiful thing about Zuri was a reminder of their own failures. They saw her beauty as a threat, a curse that made Nia's ordinary looks seem even more unworthy. The grand plans for Nia grew more elaborate with each passing day. The family hired the best tailors to design dresses for the wedding and the finest chefs to prepare a feast that would impress even the royal court. They dreamed of parades and festivals in honor of their daughter's upcoming marriage, imagining that their house would become the center of the kingdom's celebrations. But even as they planned these lavish events, the dark feeling in the house grew stronger. The family's secret hatred for Zuri was like a shadow that spread over every corner of the house. No matter how happy or excited they seemed about Nia's future, a part of them could not let go of the anger and jealousy they felt towards Zuri. In that busy, bustling house, filled with plans for a future of wealth and power, the gentle Zuri remained a quiet mystery. Though she smiled every day and helped everyone around her, the whispers and sneers never stopped. Her adoptive family's arrogance and their grand plans for Nia were a constant reminder to Zuri that sometimes, beauty and kindness can be met with cruelty and envy. And so, as the day of the grand celebration drew nearer, the household buzzed with excitement for Nia's future, while Zuri's gentle heart held on to hope that one day, true love and kindness might shine through the darkness of envy and pride. One day, the adoptive family found a way to use Zuri's beauty against her. They had a big debt owed by a poor woodcutter named Kwame. He was made to work tirelessly for Chief Issa until the debt was fully paid. The family thought of a cruel plan. They would force Zuri to marry Kwame so that the debt could finally be settled. They believed that by doing this, they could get rid of Zuri and keep their own plans for their daughter, Nia, safe. Kwame had lived a life of hardship from the very beginning. He had never known his parents. He was raised by his grandmother, a frail old woman who lived in a tiny mud house at the edge of the village. The house had cracks in the walls, and when the rain poured, water would leak through, soaking the floor. His grandmother did her best to care for him, but they barely had enough food to eat. Kwame was barely 10 years old when the old woman fell sick and died. Since then, he had to work harder to take care of himself. As a teenager, he worked as a guard for Chief Issa, standing in the cold night air, protecting the chief's livestock and wealth. He did not complain, even when he was given nothing but stale food and forced to sleep on a wooden bench outside the main house like a stray dog. But one terrible night, thieves broke into the chief's compound and stole some of his goats. Even though Kwame fought bravely, he was outnumbered, and the thieves escaped with their loot. The next morning, Chief Issa was furious. He gathered his household and workers and humiliated Kwame in front of everyone. "You are useless," Chief Issa spat, his voice dripping with anger. "If you cannot guard my goats, then you must pay for them with your own sweat." Kwame begged for mercy, but Chief Issa had already made up his mind. He stripped Kwame of his role as a guard and turned him into a servant. Now, instead of standing watch at night, Kwame was forced to fetch water from the farthest well, chop wood until his hands bled, and scrub the chief's floors until his knees ached. The chief's wife and daughter treated him even worse. Nia would mock him whenever he passed by, laughing at his torn clothes and the dirt on his face. She would throw food scraps on the ground and say, "Here, dog, eat this if you are so hungry." The servants were forbidden from showing him any kindness, and if he ever dared to rest for even a moment, he was whipped across the back and called lazy. Chief Issa claimed that Kwame had to repay him for all the stolen goats, even though everyone knew the debt was unfair. He worked endlessly, but no matter how much he did, the debt never seemed to decrease. When he could no longer endure the torment, he left the chief's house and became a woodcutter. But life as a woodcutter was no easier. He spent long hours in the deep forest, chopping trees with an old blunt axe, his hands covered in cuts and blisters. He wore ragged clothes full of holes, and most days, he barely had enough to eat. Sometimes, he would drink water just to quiet the hunger in his stomach. When the family decided to marry Zuri off to him, Kwame was shocked. He had never thought about marriage, let alone being forced into one. He knew he could barely take care of himself. How could he take care of a wife? But Chief Issa did not care about his struggles. "Consider your debt paid," the chief said with a smirk. "I am being generous by giving you a wife." The news of the forced marriage spread through the town like wildfire. People whispered that Zuri, the gentle and kind girl, was to be married off to a poor woodcutter. Kwame was not rich or famous. He spent his days cutting wood in the deep forest and earning just enough to survive. Now he was forced into a marriage he did not even plan for. The plan was cruel and unfair. On the day of the wedding, the adoptive family made no effort to hide their true intentions. They did not arrange a grand ceremony or invite many guests. Instead, they set up a small, pitiful gathering behind their house, ensuring that the event would be nothing more than a spectacle of disgrace. A few nosy neighbors stood at a distance, whispering among themselves, while the family smirked in satisfaction. There were no decorations, no music, and no celebration. Only a dull, lifeless setting meant to humiliate Zuri and Kwame. Zuri stood in a faded dress that barely fit her, its fabric thin and worn from years of use. Kwame, clad in his ragged clothes and an old tattered hat, looked every bit the poor, struggling woodcutter they wanted to shame. They were forced to stand in the middle of the dusty yard while the adoptive family sat comfortably under the shade, making loud, cruel remarks. "This is what happens when you bring bad luck into a home," one of them sneered. "Let her be someone else's burden now." Another scoffed, looking Kwame up and down. "A worthless woodcutter marrying a cursed girl. What a perfect match." The family laughed, mocking them openly, ensuring that everyone nearby heard their insults. Kwame clenched his fists but said nothing. He had endured worse. Zuri lowered her gaze, refusing to let them see the pain in her eyes. She had long accepted that kindness would never come from the people who had raised her. The marriage was rushed, with only a reluctant elder present to officiate it. No blessings were given, no well wishes shared. The words were spoken quickly, as if to rid the family of an unwanted burden. Once it was over, they shoved a small bundle of old clothes into Zuri's arms and waved them off dismissively. "Go now and don't ever come back," her adoptive mother said coldly. With heavy hearts, Zuri and Kwame walked away, their backs turned to the place that had never truly been a home. Though humiliation clung to them like a shadow, they found a quiet comfort in each other's presence. For the first time, despite everything, they were free. Living as a couple was an entirely new challenge. They were strangers bound by circumstance, forced to share a life neither of them had chosen. Kwame, though a good man, did not know how to be a husband. He was caring in the way one might be to a stray animal, offering food and shelter but never warmth. His heart was heavy with his own burdens, so much so that he did not see Zuri's. He worked tirelessly, chopping wood deep in the forest, bringing home whatever little he could, but beyond that, he barely spoke to her. He did not mistreat her, nor was he cruel, but he treated her as though she were another hardship to endure rather than a partner to cherish. Zuri did not know how to handle her husband. He was neither cold nor warm, neither cruel nor kind, just distant. He cared enough to provide for her but not enough to share himself with her. At times, she would sit across from him in their tiny leaking mud house, watching the flickering light from the small fire they managed to keep, waiting for him to say something, anything that made her feel like a wife. But he never did. The house they lived in was barely a shelter. The walls were cracked, and when the rains came, water seeped through, soaking their sleeping mat. The cold air of the night bit through the gaps in the walls, making every evening feel lonelier than the last. Hunger was a constant companion. There were nights when Kwame would go out, braving the dangers of the forest to hunt for bushmeat, so at least Zuri could have something to eat. Yet, even in those moments when she saw how hard he worked to keep them alive, she could not bring herself to feel like she was his wife. She was just someone he took care of. Despite being forced into this marriage, Chief Issa and his family would not leave them alone. They had given Zuri away, but they still tormented her, sending guards to summon her and Kwame for endless errands. "You think we're done with you just because you wear his name?" Chief Issa's wife had once sneered, grabbing Zuri's arm roughly. "You are still ours to command." Kwame, exhausted from his work, never argued. He went when they called, did as he was told, and bore the humiliation in silence. If they needed firewood, he was the one forced to chop it. If they needed something heavy carried, it was his burden to bear. And Zuri, though she longed to resist, could only follow suit, enduring the sneers and sharp words from the chief's family. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when she lay awake in the damp, dark hut, she wondered why life had chosen this path for her. Was she destined to always be at the mercy of others? Would she ever know what it felt like to be loved? She had never wished for a grand life, just a simple one where she was wanted, not just tolerated. Kwame carried his own mystery. On his shoulder there was a mark, an unusual delicate stripe that seemed to glow faintly in certain light. Zuri had noticed it once when he removed his shirt after a long day of work. She had wanted to ask about it, but something in the way Kwame carried himself, in the way he avoided personal conversations, made her hold back. Perhaps he himself did not know what it meant. Or perhaps, like everything else, he had chosen to ignore it. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet nothing changed. They were trapped in poverty, trapped under the weight of Chief Issa's cruelty, and trapped in a marriage that was little more than a silent existence. Zuri longed for something more, but she did not know what that was. And Kwame, lost in his own struggles, could not see that she was drowning right beside him. One day, after another disgraceful and tedious day in the hands of nature and Chief Issa's family, they both came home hungry and exhausted. The weight of their struggles pressed heavily upon them, yet neither spoke. It was already late, and as always, they lay on the cold, uneven floor of their leaking mud house, sinking into their usual quietness, drowning in their individual miseries. The silence stretched between them, thick and unmoving, like an unspoken truth neither dared to voice. They had been living this way for more than a month now. Two souls bound by fate yet living as strangers. Zuri had learned not to expect anything from Kwame. He was good, yes, but he did not know how to love her. He provided what little he could, but he did not hold her, did not speak to her beyond what was necessary. He was present, yet absent, and the weight of that loneliness settled deep within her bones. She turned away from him, curling into herself, but this time something inside her broke. A sob slipped from her lips before she could stop it. It was quiet at first, but in the silence of the room it was deafening. She never cried when he was around. She loved crying alone. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend she was fine when the sun rose again. But tonight she could no longer hold it in. The sound of her pain hit Kwame like a realization. He had always known she was unhappy. How could she not be? But hearing her sob was different. It cracked something inside him, something he had locked away for as long as he could remember. He turned his head, watching her shoulders shake in the dim light of their tiny home. For the first time he truly saw her, not just as the woman fate had tied him to, but as someone who was suffering just as much as he was. Slowly, uncertainly he sat up. Then, in a gesture that surprised even himself, he reached out and touched her shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched her, and for a moment she froze. Then, without thinking, she turned and buried her face in his chest, her sobs racking her body. He hesitated before wrapping his arms around her, unsure if he was doing it right, unsure if she wanted this from him. But when her fingers clutched at his shirt, when her sobs melted into the warmth of his shoulder, he realized it felt good. For the first time, Zuri had a shoulder to cry on. And for the first time, Kwame allowed himself to comfort someone, to be more than just a provider, more than just a man enduring life. That night changed something between them. Their home was still the same, leaking, cold and unwelcoming. Their struggles had not disappeared overnight. Chief Issa's torment continued, and hunger remained an unwelcome visitor. But in the midst of it all, something new had begun to bloom. The days that followed felt different. Their silences were no longer empty, but comfortable. Kwame started waiting for Zuri when they were forced to run errands, making sure she wasn't left behind. He would bring her the first bite of any food he found before eating himself. Zuri, in return, started looking forward to his return from the forest, preparing what little they had to share. Then laughter came. It was small at first, a quiet chuckle when Zuri made a joke about the way he snored, a smirk when Kwame watched her attempt to carry a bundle of firewood that was clearly too big for her. One day, after an exhausting afternoon of fetching water for Chief Issa's family, Kwame tripped in the mud. He expected Zuri to scold him for getting dirty, but instead she burst into laughter. A real genuine laugh. It was infectious, and before he knew it he was laughing too. Tonight they talked. The conversations were not deep, not yet, but they were there. She told him about the stars, about how she used to dream of traveling beyond the kingdom. He listened. He told her about his days in the forest, about the animals he encountered, and the way the trees whispered in the wind. She listened. One evening, as they sat together, Zuri's eyes fell on the mark on his shoulder. She had seen it before, but now she felt comfortable enough to ask. "That mark on your shoulder, what is it?" Kwame looked down at it, fingers brushing over the strange, delicate stripe that always seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. He had never thought much of it, but now, with her eyes on him, it felt like something significant. "It's just a birthmark," he said, though his voice carried uncertainty. "At least, that's what I've always thought." Zuri tilted her head. "It doesn't look like an ordinary birthmark." He exhaled, rubbing his shoulder absent-mindedly. "I've wondered about it before," he admitted. "Maybe that's why I try to keep it covered. I don't know. Something about it feels strange." She reached out, hesitated, then softly ran her fingers over it. A shiver ran through him, not from cold but from something he could not explain. "Well," she said, "I think it makes you special." He scoffed, but there was warmth in his voice. "Special? I'm just a woodcutter." She smiled. "A woodcutter who carries a mystery on his skin." For the first time he did not dismiss it. He simply looked at her, and in her gaze, he saw something he had never seen before: acceptance. Their world was still cruel, still filled with hardship, but now they had each other. And for the first time since they had been forced together, that felt like enough.